mai ka ike, e ho mai ka ikaika, e ho mai ki akamai, e ho mai ka maupopo pono, e ho mai ka ike pāpānua, e ho mai ka mana. Nā au mākua mai ka la hiki a ka lākau, mai ka hokui a ka halawai. Nā au mākua ia ka hina kua, ia ka hina alo, ia ka akau i ka lani. O ki hai ka lani, o e ka lani, nunuru i ka lani, ka holo i ka lani. E ia ka pula o ko o Halealoha Ayau o hana. E mālama o kou ia mākou. E ulu i ka lani, e ulu i ka honua, e ulu i ka pai aina o Hawaiʻi. E ho mai ka ike, e ho mai ka ikaika, e ho mai ki akamai, e ho mai ka maupopo pono, e ho mai ka ike pāpānua, e ho mai ka mana. Nā au mākua mai ka la hiki a ka lākau, mai ka hookui a ka halawai. Nā au mākua ia ka hina kua, ia ka hina alo, ia ka akau i ka lani. O ki hai ka lani, o e ka lani, nunuru i ka lani, ka holo i ka lani. E ia ka pula o ko ngā o iwi o Hawaiʻi nei, e mālama o kou ia mākou. E ulu i ka lani, e ulu i ka honua, e ulu i ka pai aina o Hawaiʻi. E ho mai ka ike, e ho mai ka ikaika, e ho mai ke akamai, e ho mai ka maupopo pono, e ho mai ka ike pāpānua, e ho mai ka mana. E nā kupuna o Hawaiʻi, mai ka manaho o ākea ai a manaho. Kei kūnei mākou makapo hiki o papa. Ua hanau ia mākou mai ia papa mai ia hoki ho ia papa. Nā mākou e mālama i nā iwi o ko mākou kūpuna. Nā mō e mālama i ko mākou iwi a hoko mau ka lokahi o kākou. No laia. E ho mai ka ike, e ho mai ka noheo, e ho mai ki aloha, e ho mai ka ikaika. Ānama, ua noa.
Dear people who are present in this room, especially dear US General Consul Darian Atkins, dear representatives of the Office of Hawaiian Affairs, namely dear Kalehua Caceres, dear Mana Caceres, dear Edward Ayau, dear ancestors. I have the great honor to open this ceremony of repatriation of iwi Kupuna that have been taken by Germans in the time of colonial violence and that have been kept at University of Göttingen for many years. This repatriation of the iwi Kupuna back to their homelands allows for healing and restoration of dignity so they may finally rest in peace. Please let me introduce to you the representatives of Göttingen University and of the city of Göttingen who will participate in this ceremony. Namely, Professor Dr. Metin Tolan, President of Göttingen University. Professor Dr. Margarete, Speaker of the Senate of the University. Pipa Schneider, representative of the student body of Göttingen Senate. Then the members of the Provenance Research Group. Professor Dr. Regina Bendix, Professor Dr. Rebecca Habermas, Professor Dr. Christoph Viehbahn, Dr. Birgit Großkopf, Dr. Holger Stöcker, Dr. Jonathan Kurzwelli, Dr. Richard Hölzel, Dr. Christian Vogel, Katharina Stötzel und Jan zum Mallen, and myself, Luisa Allemeyer. Please let me also introduce to you Professor Dr. Birgit Abels, cultural musicologist. I've seen her already. Yeah, over there. Cultural musicologist with a research focus on the Western Pacific island world. The city of Göttingen is represented by the mayor Onyekashi Oshunovu. Please allow us to express firstly some words from our side, followed by a video message from the Office of Hawaiian Affairs chairperson, Carmen Hululince, followed by words of Kalehua Caceres, followed by words of the US General Consul Darian Aikens, followed by words of Mana Caceres, and followed by words of Edward Ayau. The ceremony will be closed with a pikai, allowing us all to be part of the dehumanization of the iwi kupuna and the process of healing. The first speaker from Göttingen is the president of Göttingen University, the president, Professor Dr. Metin Tolan.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Allemeyer. Honored guests, dear Mrs. Caceres, dear Mr. Caceres, dear Mr. Ayau, and dear Mr. Consul General Darian Aikens, dear ancestors. It is with respect and admiration that I welcome you here at Göttingen University on your present journey to bring home your ancestors. With relief and gratitude, we acknowledge our decades of work, your decades of work to find and rebury your iwi kupuna in their native soil. Work such as yours puts in sharp and new perspective the effects of globalization as it has grown from commerce and global colonial conquest over the centuries. The University of Göttingen is an internationally acting research university with a long tradition. Founded in the year 1737, in the Age of Enlightenment, it is committed to the values of social responsibility of science, democracy, tolerance, and justice. With its motto, In publica commoda, for the good of all, it wants to contribute to shaping a better future for humankind. Given this spirit, Göttingen University emphatically shares the German government's stance that human remains in collections must be identified and returned. Over the past year, our team of researchers has begun to lay open in just how many places of the earth human remains were taken and brought here for study. The university is committed to be open to all requests for human remains restitution. We come together today in our shared humanity and in a new spirit of enlightenment. As we all know, knowledge undergoes change. Today, we seek to shed light on the past and to understand and set right what was done to your ancestors in removing them from their graves. We apologize to your ancestors for the fact that our ancestors have made them involuntary participants in research carried out under paradigms that we today no longer share. From today's scientific perspective, the human rights violations committed to bring human remains to Europe and elsewhere are cause for retrospective grief. Both the United Nations Declaration of Human Rights as well as stringent and constantly evaluated codes of ethics in research assist us to never again cause pain and disruption of the kind that we hope today in our joint ceremony to overcome. We seek healing together with you and our societies of origin and other societies of origin seeking to reclaim their ancestors. Let me then again thank you for undertaking this journey and for moving our university forward in removing the troubling remnants of colonialism in collections. Let me also give you a small address from our Minister of Science of Culture and Culture of Minister Tümmler. He told me that I should the warmest greetings to you. He says that he is extremely pleased that the provenance research funded by the Volkswagen Foundation in the collections of the Georg August University Göttingen have led to this result. It encourages the state of Lower Saxony in its efforts to further expand provenance research, especially in connection with colonial contexts. Thank you again for coming here to Göttingen. Thanks a lot for this, and thanks a lot that this ceremony is becoming possible. Thanks a lot.
May I ask Margarete as the next speaker?
Honored ancestors of our esteemed guests from Hawaii, dear Mana Caceres, dear Kalehua Caceres, dear Edward Ayau, and dear Consul General Darian Akins, liebe Gäste. I'm speaking here in my role as the elected speaker of the Academic Senate of the University of Göttingen. The Senate consists of 13 representatives elected by all groups of the university, its students, its administrative technical staff, and faculty. It is involved in all fundamental decisions relating to the university's scientific orientation, plays a key role in its self-administration, and acts as an advocate of the university's goals. It is thus fair to say that I speak for the members of the university. You are here to salvage and return the remains of your ancestors, your iwi kupuna, back to their home in Hawaii, back to their homeland in the very sense of the word. They were taken from graves and burial sites as part of an illegal and illegitimate act. Not only was this an unlawful appropriation based on a presumptuous and objectifying coalition of science and colonialism, but perhaps even more importantly, the peace of your dead was violated, and fundamental ideas like the continuity of time and the anchorage to a place of birth were offended. On behalf of the university, I would like to express our sorrow and deepest regret, as well as our humble gratitude that you have pursued the restitution of your iwi kupuna, allowing us to jointly, as a community, restore dignity to the deceased and the living, and create forgiveness and mutual understanding. Let me add one sentence as the representative of a scientific institution. I hope that we can learn the lesson that humanization and rehumanization are an essential requirement for a science that much too often treats its subjects as objects, without considering context or cultural embeddedness. Thank you.
So the next speaker is Regina Bendix from the research project.
Honored ancestors, esteemed guests from Hawaii, dear Kalehua, dear Mana, dear Edward, dear Consul General Aikens, sehr geehrter Herr Präsident, liebe Gäste, I have the honor to speak to you on behalf of our research team and to thank you for your patience with our stumbling efforts to be ready for your arrival. All of us have been learning with intensity and humility what scientific collections look like from your perspective. All of us share in the dawning bewilderment that Europeans treated human remains like collectibles, taking them from the ground and transporting them across the globe without permission. Our university is large, and many who work here do not know the collections at all. Even for those studying medicine or biology, the extent and origins of the two human remains collections are generally not grasped, not to speak of the many thousands of such remains in collections elsewhere, predominantly in the global north. They are an outcome of the baleful marriage between colonialism and science during the 18th to 19th centuries, and 20th centuries too, a linkage which has been largely forgotten, at least in the global north. My task is to give you preliminary insight into the journey that your iwi kupuna, awaiting their return, have behind them. We can only offer parts of their life's story that the limited documentation reveals, but we trust that you will be able to augment those narratives from your historical knowledges. On this journey, your ancestors were treated no longer as honored deceased relatives, but as scientific objects to be studied and in some instances exhibited. Western colonials sought legitimation for conquering other peoples through race science. The frenzied collecting of remains served this misguided effort to compare and hierarchize peoples, shored up by the European hubris of their own civilized superiority. In a variant of the capitalist drive to amass and own, collectors went overboard in procuring not just ethnographica, but also human remains. So many thousands of individuals were exhumed and taken without permission and regard for the families whose ancestors they are. There has been a sea change. Race science is discredited, and we now face in disbelief the disturbing enormity of human remains collections. We recognize the need to apologize in the name of our forebears for holding your ancestors for so long unburied in cartons and closets. It is thanks to your tireless insistence to bury your iwi kupuna that their and your plight is recognized as a human rights infraction. 4 iwi kupuna were taken along from the island of Oahu by a medical doctor named Bendix in 1854. One of the ancestors was taken from a grave in the plain Kulau, the other 3 from a burial site at Diamond's Head. Bendix sent these remains to his former teacher in Braunschweig, where in 1869 they were integrated into the collection of Wilhelm Blasius, who was also the founder of the Natural History Museum of Braunschweig. One of Blasius's descendants studied medicine in Göttingen and in 1934 donated parts of the museum's human remains collection. Since then, these 4 individuals were part of the Blumenbach collection of Göttingen's Anatomical Institute. A further individual also came from Oahu. This ancestor was taken to Europe by a sea captain of unknown name before 1863 and was given to the teacher and natural scientist Wilhelm Freden. Freden was rector of the Oldenburg School of Navigation. He sent this ancestor in 1863 to Göttingen and to the Göttingen anatomist Rudolf Wagner, curator of the Blumenbach collection at the time. One individual is represented by a plaster cast only. The whereabouts of the skull from which the cast was taken are not known. The original is not part of the Göttingen's collection. In the available documents, the cast is described to be that of a Sandwich Islander, that is, an individual from Hawaii. It reached Göttingen between 1840 and 1874. There is no information on who took the cast, but its presence is evidence of the painful ease with which human remains were handled and exchanged. Göttingen's anatomical collection holds further iwi kupuna, who were dug up on the island of Maui by the anatomist Georg Tilenius. He described the place as, quote, a burial site from the time of the battles of the first Kamehameha against Maui in the dunes of Malelea Bay. Those battles took place between 1790 and 1795. In 1860, Hawaiian authorities had explicitly forbidden the taking of human remains from burial sites. But like so many Europeans, Tilenius considered cultures outside his own inferior and thought it permissible to disturb the peace of the dead, which was illegal also in German lands at the time, of course. As of 1905, Tilenius was director of the Hamburg Museum of Ethnology, and in 1919, he bestowed these human remains to the Museum's anthropological collection. From there, the remains were consigned to the Göttingen Anatomical Institute in 1953. The full case reports, to still be completed in the coming weeks, will detail for you and for us what further information one is able to add to the journey of these iwi kupuna. Our team wants to assure you and your ancestors that this work touches each of us deeply. Your presence here is motivating us to continue this difficult and painful endeavor. It forces us to confront the violence of European colonialism and its evidence within scientific legacies. With your presence, you support Germany's political, social, and scholarly efforts to come to terms with its involvement in colonialism's woes. We thank you for this big impulse to reach out to one another and to redress the wrongs of the past.
We will now listen and see a video broadcast from the Office of Hawaiian Affairs Chairman, Carmen Hulu Lindsay, that will be transmitted on the screen.
Kako. My name is Carmen Hulu Lindsay, and I am the chairperson of the Office of Hawaiian Affairs Board of Trustees. In October 2017, representatives of the Office of Hawaiian Affairs, Hui Malama Ina Kupuna o Hawaiʻi Nei, and our native Hawaiian community ventured to Dresden, Germany, to retrieve iwi kupuna that had been held for over a century within anthropological collections. These iwi kupuna were collected during a time of colonial violence, a time when Western society was attempting to appoint themselves as being the highest point of evolution over all others. A quest ensued in the 18th and 19th centuries on the backs of imperialist agendas that resulted in the theft and collection of ancestral human remains of many indigenous peoples around the world. Our ancestors were horrendously dehumanized and objectified for study without the consent of their families and against prevailing kingdom of Hawaii law at the time, protecting the sanctity of the grave. Notably, this was the first restitution conducted in the state of Saxony, which also served to signify a confession of humanitarianism and respect to the Hawaiian people. Our ancestors were rehumanized, and we were made whole again by finally being able to fulfill our responsibility to return this iwi kupuna home. As this unfortunate chapter of colonialism was finally coming to a close, a new chapter of shared humanity was birthed, and a commitment was made to repeat this event with the return of more iwi kupuna in the future. Today, we are seeing this promise made good with the return of many more iwi kupuna from various institutions throughout Germany. Further, we now add Vienna, Austria, into this humanitarian family as we welcome the return of iwi kupuna from the Natural History Museum in Vienna as part of this February 2022 retrieval effort. This is the ultimate way to educate the world about each other and to reconnect these institutions to the living people of where these cultures come from. As was shared in 2017, it takes great courage and compassion to admit to one's atonement to begin the healing of the spirit. There has been much change in the last decade amongst museum professionals and anthropological scholars that demonstrates a better understanding of indigenous peoples and the past injustices committed against us. We certainly acknowledge this and applaud the rehumanization of these individuals and institutions. Today, these actions allow us to heal, not only as individuals, but as a lahui, a Hawaiian nation. Further, we see the event of today and that of 2017 as recreating history going forward and telling a new story as fellow human beings together. As we acknowledge that other institutions throughout Germany and other places in Europe are on the cusp of joining in this shared humanity, we will indeed return soon to keep adding to this story. Mahalo for walking this road with us.
Au hea o ko e nā kupuna o ko o ahu alua. Ko ka kuhi hewa. I ko le ahi, a me nā ko olau. Ua lohe ia ko o ko leo ka hea ua hiki maila nā mo'o. Au hea o ko e nā kupuna o nā honoa o Pi'ilani, o ka malala walu hoi, nā mamo a maui a kama, I ka hono o ma'alaia. E no mako ka o ko keiki mo o puna ke kahi. A noho mai, noho mai, noho mai. No mako no ke koleana e kiai. A hali o ko I ko o ko one hanau. I ko Hawaiʻi pai aina. I hiki ke kanu hou ia I ka poli o haumea. E hoi ai ka moi loa a lu'u I po. He wahi leo mihi ke ia. I ko o ko ka awale mai ka poli me hana olu o papahana o moku. Me ko una au lu'u e mihi ai no ke ia walo I hiloa I ka awale mai ka ohana. E pili hou ana no. Au hea o ko e nā kama o ko Hawaiʻi pai aina, nā kiai o mauna kea, nā kahu o Haleakala, nā lālā o ka makou, nā mamo o ka ala, a me nā oiwi o wai ale. E alu like kākou I ka awamo koleana, I ka mālama iwi kupuna. I hoi Hawaii nā kupuna I ko lākou kūlana ma ka mai ma ka ohana. Nā lākou no e alakai, kiai, mālama a pale mai. Au hea o kou e ko Kelemania, ka poe hoi o Göttingen. He wahi leo mahalo keia no ko o ko ike I ka hana kūpono e hanai, no keia poe kupuna, a no ko kākou mau aupuni. E ho'ola ia kākou a pau, e ola. Velina mai me ke aloha ia kākou pākahi a pau. Aloha nui. I bring with me warm greetings of aloha from our poe oiwi o Hawaiʻi pai aina to you, the people of Göttingen. My name is Kalehua Caceres, and I stand before you as an OEV of the Aupuni of Hawaii and as a kupa of Ma'ili Wai'anai. Geography aside, I'm sure we share many similarities and therefore similar responsibilities. We are grandchildren, sons and daughters, husbands and wives, mothers and fathers, grandparents. Today we acknowledge another very important relationship within our family, our ancestral family, our kupuna who have moved on from this earthly realm and crossed over to the next. Vahia kupuna, ike aku, ike mai, koku aku, kokua mai, pela ihola kanohona ohana. Our ancestors have a wise saying, recognize and be recognized, help and be helped. Such is family life. Our colonial history has created, amongst other things, disconnection from our kupuna long departed, and with that, disconnection from our land, our language, our sovereign nation state, and sometimes a subsequent fracturing, a kaumaha, a burden of trauma within ourselves and our people. However, one very salient and foundational value has transcended time, space, and history for our lahui, aloha ohana, a love of family. This enduring understanding, though, is not unique solely to Hawaii. In fact, I'm sure we can agree the world over that we all share a deep sense of love for our family. That love of ohana does not end with death. In fact, it endures in memories, in names, and within ourselves for so long as we remain connected to our loved ones that have passed on from this realm and into the next. With our na'au tuned and calibrated to receive the messages of our kupuna, we are finding our ancestral voices. We are restoring our ancestral foundation with each kupuna repatriated and returned to their eternal slumber in the bosom of Haumea, reunited with ohana. Ike aku, ike mai. We are recognizing our kupuna again, and they are recognizing us in return. Having their leadership severed from our lives for several generations has caused many of us to lose our way, to lose ourselves. Reconnection to our ancestral family helps us to find our way again. We are welcoming our kupuna back into our lives and homes to continue to guide us, to inspire us, to protect us. Koku aku, kokua mai. Kupuna and mo'opuna share a special relationship in life. They are our first teachers, our mentors, our advocates. When our kupuna transcend to po, that relationship becomes stronger when maintained and nurtured. The spiritual connection has no restraints like that of the physical realm. They continue to be our teachers, our mentors, and our advocates. Our responsibility in return is to listen to their kahea, their call, and then be proficient in action. Our kupuna here today have helped to facilitate their return home. They have guided our steps here and will guide our steps back. The government of Germany, the city of Göttingen, the American consulate, and Göttingen University have been instrumental in supporting our kupuna's return to Hawaii. Mahalo palena ole. Thank you for recognizing and honoring aloha ohana. Pela ihola kanohona ohana. This is the life of family. Today marks a significant event in the history of the people of Hawaii and the people of the city of Göttingen. We have established a connection to one another through today's repatriation. We have forged the relationship that now requires a reciprocal commitment and accountability. I ask that we honor this relationship through our joint advocacy to repatriate not only Hawaii's iwi kupuna, moipu, and mea kapu, held in public and private collections, but that of all the world's nations and peoples, so that as the human race, we can all heal from this selfless act of aloha. One day, you and I both will be kupuna. We will be the ancestors. We have a kuleana, a responsibility, to leave a lasting impact on the next generations of our families. They will inherit our legacy. Let our legacy be one of aloha ohana, a love of family. And let us leave a lasting example for them to follow, because one day they too will be the ancestors. Mahalo nui I keia hui ana o kākou. Thank you for sharing this space with us in honor of our kupuna. Ke aloha no.
So may I ask you, General Consul Diane Akins, to give the next words. Thank you.
Sehr geehrter Herr Professor Dr. Tolan, sehr geehrter Herr Präsident, sehr geehrte Frau Dr. Allemeyer, sehr geehrte Frau Professor Dr. Bose, sehr geehrte Frau Professor Dr. Bendix, dear Madam Mayor, dear Mrs. Caceres, dear Mr. Caceres, dear Mr. Ayau, dear guest. Today, we have come together to mark an important day in a journey home. Today is a solemn day. Native Hawaiian ancestors whose remains were taken from the Kingdom of Hawaii long ago are returning home. I am humbled to take part in today's ceremony honoring the repatriation of the iwi kupuna. I thank you for the opportunity to speak here today. I would like to express my sincere gratitude to the delegation representing the Office of Hawaiian Affairs. Thank you for your dedication to bringing home your ancestors and for your ongoing advocacy on behalf of the Hawaiian people. The iwi kupuna, placed in your care, will return to Hawaii for reburial and the restoration of family. Our government supports Native Hawaiian people's efforts to repatriate ancestors to their homelands. The embassy and the consulates in Germany stand ready to assist in facilitating any future international repatriation of ancestral remains. Im Namen der US-Botschaft und der Konsulate in Deutschland möchte ich mich bei allen Beteiligten der Universität Göttingen bedanken, die an diesem Prozess mitgewirkt haben. Thank you to the University of Göttingen, under the leadership of Professor Tolan, and to Dr. Allemeyer and Professor Bendix for their support and the organizational efforts that have paved the way for the journey home. The University of Göttingen, Mr. Ayau, and the Office of Hawaiian Affairs have worked together to return these ancestral remains to their homelands. It is this very collaboration that leads me to my closing thought. At the most fundamental level, today, we are experiencing a moment of shared humanity, one of mutual respect, of protecting human dignity, of honoring cultural traditions and practices, and recognizing the vital importance of people's connections to their past, and of the responsibility to acknowledge and address historical injustices. Every shared moment, every cultural encounter creates a new possibility and new connections. I think that our gathering here does that as well. It offers a shared path toward better understanding each other, listening to each other, learning from each other. Culture shapes who we are where we have been, and where we are going. And the exchange of cultural knowledge and of cultural experiences enriches us as individuals and communities. We can build on this profound moment to make it last, as it leads to our inextricably interwoven future. I would like to end my brief remarks on a somewhat personal note. And I would like to particularly address the ancestors, families, members in Hawaii who are participating from afar. I want to personally acknowledge your presence. Mr. Ayau, I hope that I get this right, because as I've participated in this event and the one yesterday, hopefully I've learned. And here's something that I've learned. Every journey, even a virtual one, leaves a trace among those who travel and those who are touched by the travelers. Yesterday and today, the geographical distance between Hawaii and northern Germany, measured conventionally in thousands of miles, has been bridged and filled with the Hawaiian delegation's compassion and their commitment to your ancestors. Mahalo, thank you, and danke.
O Ralph Heinrich Kulmen ke kane, o Katharina Margarete Weisling ka wahine, no pula ua makaaina o Nienburg, Deutschland, a wahana ia o Katharina Margarete Kulmen he wahine. O Wilhelm Niemann ke kane, o Katharina Margarete Kulmen ka wahine, no pula ua makaaina o Nienburg, Deutschland, a wahana ia o Isla Maria Niemann he wahine. O Johann Dietrich Speckmann ke kane, o Isla Maria Niemann ka wahine, noho pūlaua makaaina o Grossenfelder, Deutschland, aua hanau ia o William Dietrich Speckmann he kane. O William Dietrich Speckmann ke kane, o Mary Kū kahiki o Kalani Kapu, Haleola kahu ole ka wahine, noho pūlaua makaaina kuehu lepo o ka ku maka e. A ua hanau ia o William Kawaiponi mo I Dietrich Speckmann he kane. O William Kawaiponi mo I Dietrich Speckmann he kane, o Mary Kaleoleo Lani ko'o ka wahine, noho pūlaua a ua hanau ia o Josephine Kawena Ulau ka onohi o Kala Speckmann he wahine. O Thomas John Canetta ke kane, o Josephine Kawena Ula ka onohi o Kala Speckmann ka wahine, noho pūlaua ua hanau ia o Patricia Kawaiponi mo I Canetta he wahine. O Doran Moore Kaleilani Caceres Senior he kane, o Patricia Kawaiponi mo I Canetta ka wahine, noho pūlaua ua hanau ia o Doran Moore Kaleilani Caceres Jr. he kane. O Doran Moore Kaleilani Caceres Jr. ke kane, o Susan Hui Hui ka wahine, noho pūlaua a ua hanau ia o Mana Kaleilani Caceres. O Waono o Mana Kaleilani Caceres. Ola kahaloa o Hannah Speckmann. Aloha kākou und guten Tag. For those of us who carry this kuleana, this responsibility to research, to locate, to care for, to repatriate, and to carry home and rebury our iwi kupuna, there are things that we recognize and there are things that we cannot escape. One of these things is what I personally like to call the Kupuna Hour. It's a time where our ancestors are most active spiritually, And apparently, even if you're halfway across the world, the kupuna know what time it is. So at 2:30 a.m. Tuesday morning, after landing in Germany a few hours before, I woke up with a sudden urge to open my laptop and search for the files relating to my own genealogy, my mo'okuauhau, my pedigree, of which I've shared with you this evening. I've always known that William Dietrich Speckmann, one of my third great-grandfathers, was from Germany. But I never really followed my genealogy in this direction and its connection to Germany. William Dietrich Speckmann was just the first German name in a long line of Hawaiian names until, of course, 2:30 a.m. Tuesday morning. I was able to research and find William Dietrich Speckmann's parents, his grandparents, his great-grandparents. William Dietrich Speckmann was born in Grossenfahler, which I believe isn't too far from where we stand today. Of course, I have no clue how close that is because everything is far in comparison to Hawaii. Once he left Germany, he sailed across the Atlantic Ocean where he reached New York. He then traveled across North America. He boarded a ship in San Francisco bound for Hilo, Hawaii, where he met Mary Kūkahiki o Kalani Kapu, Halealoha Kahu'ole, and forever established a kinship between Hawaii and Germany, not just for my family, but for many other Hawaiian families with German ancestry. 4 generations after William Dietrich Speckmann left his homeland of Germany, I stand before you, his descendant, honoring the very concept of ohana, family. Not just the paper or the pedigree part of ohana, but the responsibilities and acknowledgments that come with that. We are here today because of the people of Göttingen honor and acknowledges the responsibilities that we all have as grandchildren to take care of our grandparents. That is what today is all about, reestablishing our pilina, our relationship to our grandparents. Today's repatriation allows us to accompany our kupuna back home to Hawaiʻi as they continue onto their journey to Po. To the people of Göttingen, mahalo for the opportunity to reconnect to the land of my own German ohana. Mahalo for giving me this opportunity to honor and care for my Hawaiian ancestors, as well as my German kupuna. And to all of the people of the world whose ancestors were stolen and taken far from home, your ancestors are waiting. And last but definitely not least, e ku'ulahui e na uivi o ko Hawaiʻi pai aina, our ancestors are also waiting. Ola naivi, mahalo.
May I now ask Edward Ayang to give his words? Thank you.
I wanted to, I gave a title to my remarks. It's Imana i Kauiwi, Hawaiian Humanity Empowered by Repatriation. To Dr. Metin Tolan, President of Göttingen University, Speaker of the University Senate, Dr. Margarete, and Professor Regina Bendix of the Provenance Research Group and the research group members. To my kumu Edward Lavan, Hui Kanahele and Pualani Kanahele Kanakaole. My parents, Reynolds Halealoha Ayau. My grandmothers, Harriet Ahiona Ayau Ne, Hilda Naohio Kamalu Bishaka Eo, and Lady Poi Poi U'u. My siblings, my entire ohana, my family. To OHA Board of Trustees Chair Hulu Lindsay, Kapohana Sylvia Hussey, Compliance Specialist Kai Markel, and Repatriation Advocate and future of the Hawaiian Repatriation Movement, Kamakana Ferreira. To Council for Native Hawaiian Advancement CEO Kuhio Lewis, and Wahine Mana Extraordinaire, Ms. Mihan Okala Hind, for the generous financial support for our travel expenses. To my keiki, my children, Mariana, Keonauna, Kaneaolono, Haianaala, and Kuaia. Honorable Council General Darian Akins. To my heroes, George Jarrett Helm, Hawaiian German. Walter Riddy, Emmett Aluli, Atwood Makanani, Noel Kahanu, Hinale Moana Wangkalu, Kihei Nahalea, Dr. Philip Sorsch, Dr. Larissa Forster, Holga Starker, Dr. Cressida Ford, Dr. Paul Turnbull, Dr. Amber Adanui, Dr. Timothy McEwen, and my colleagues at Return, Reconcile, Renew. Walter Echohawk and John Echohawk of the Native American Rights Fund, Ali Murakami, and all the lawyers at the Native Hawaiian Legal Corporation. All those gathered here today, but especially to the Kupuna, for whom we are gathered today to acknowledge their dignity. Aloha no kako. Olana iwi is an alelo no Ayau, a Hawaiian proverb that means the bones live. And it is said of an elder who is well cared for by his or her family, and it is a reference to those who provide that care. The international repatriation of iwi kupuna, of ancestral remains, and moipu, funerary possessions, is a dutiful expression of Hawaiian cultural traditions that place high value on all that is ancestral, especially the sanctity of human remains, funerary possessions, and places of burial. The traditions of family, care, responsibility, and protection are paramount to an interdependent relationship in which the living and the deceased look after one another. One's role in the family does not end with death, it elevates. It elevates to that of ancestral guardian, and it is the role of the living to protect the dead, to protect their places of interment, to protect the dignity of their afterlife. In turn, it is the role of the deceased, when called upon, to provide living descendants with the necessary tools, including courage, strength, intelligence, righteous understanding, and avenues of communication. For the past 32 years, efforts by Native Hawaiians to return iwi kupuna and moipu from domestic and foreign institutions were undertaken to continue the restoration of our ancestral foundation, to return spiritual energy called mana to our homeland and to the living descendants, and to support the rebuilding and empowerment of all that is Hawaiian, beginning with our dignity, ancestral and living, that will no doubt culminate with the reestablishment of our Hawaiian kingdom. Hawaiians have been able to get international institutions to return our ancestors absent express legal authority through the assertion of the value of aloha. You see, there are certain self-truths that are so fundamental, so pure and beautiful, that they cannot be denied. Reuniting families through restitution and reburial out of a solemn respect for the sanctity of the grave is one such self-truth. It does not require justification because it is the justification. It is the essence of aloha that is the source of our authority to repatriate. Love for those who came before us, which is best explained by the following family mo'olelo, or history, that was shared by Dr. Kamana Beamer. Quote, the story of the 1819 Battle of Kuamo'o has been in our family for generations. My grandmother shared the courage of our ancestors to support traditional religious laws in the midst of tremendous social change. This story is filled with tragedy, as our ancestors, severely outgunned, perished at the hands of opposing forces. It is also a story of hope, expressed in the words of Chiefess Manono, Malama ko aloha, keep your love, after her husband Kekuokalani had been killed. Her words were a plea to both sides that no matter what obstacles come, keep your love for one another. This was a powerful guidance for future generations, unquote. Aloha is a shield to protect us from the harm caused by the repeated knowledge of the desecration and theft of our ancestors' bones. Aloha can be a spear to be asserted when museum officials refer to ancestors as osteological material, as their property, or to their ownership of the iwi kupuna. Hawaiian ancestors mated to create loving families, not osteological material. Aloha is the ultimate place of refuge and safety when our ancestors are objectified and dehumanized, which in turn objectifies and dehumanizes the living descendants. There is no statute of limitations or legal prohibition on the assertion of aloha in any part of the world. And it is the authority by which our delegation, Hui Iwi Kuamo'o, come here today to retrieve the ancestors and escort them home, and the authority by which we will continue to do so. According to the Disney movie Lilo and Stitch, ohana means no one gets left behind. Yeah. Our prior experience in Germany, aside from yesterday, our first experience was a handover ceremony at the Dresden Museum of Ethnology on the 23rd of October, 2017. The day after our iwi kupuna were ceremonially prepared for the journey home. Dr. Marian Ackerman, then Director General of the Dresden State Art Collection, stated, and I quote, "The restitution of human remains has a great importance. It is an act of humanity," unquote. Dr. Eva Marie Stange, then State Minister of Science and Arts of the Free State of Saxony, said in referring to the iwi kupuna housed at the Dresden Museum, quote, "In this case, they became scientific objects. Today, after more than 100 years, we are looking at those collections from a different angle. They are being rehumanized. For us, they are no longer objects. They are the mortal remains of human beings. With their return, we're giving back their value to the deceased persons and their families. Their life stories made them victims in the name of science and colonialism," unquote. In reflecting on what the Dresden repatriation effort involved and what it meant in the largest scheme of things, Ms. Noel Kahanu, a Hawaiian wahine mana in her own right, experienced in repatriation and reburial, who had written on indigenous perspectives of museum issues, and who participated in the ceremonies at Dresden, writes the following. Someone asked, quote, "Someone asked recently, what is the future direction of repatriation? I responded that we should look to those examples rising from the international context. These returns happen not because the federal law mandated it, but because of individual and institutional relationships that have developed over time, because doors were opened by those who understood the humanity in returning the iwi kupuna to their homelands. And if we can open a door, we can also hold it open for the next group petitioning for the return of their ancestors. It is a network of people working together inside and outside of museums, redefining ethics and reasserting notions of human dignity that will bring the last of our iwi kupuna home. In doing so, we will be liberating museum relations into the future," unquote. Although the 26-year-long case at Dresden was fraught with hardships, Dr. Stange then wisely opines, quote, "An inglorious chapter is being closed, but at the same time, a new page for better chapters is now being opened in the book of history on which we will write together," unquote. Let us celebrate our respective humanity, the Hawaiian and the German people. Let us continue the journey to write the second chapter of this book of history, with the first example being the Übersee Museum yesterday. And let us do so together by Malama ko aloha. Let us keep our love for one another. The valuable lesson learned over the past 3 decades by the impacts of repatriation is that it has allowed Hawaiians to restore our dignity, to restitute our Hawaiian humanity. Ola naivi, the bones live. I wanted, before I step down, to just go off script and to issue an apology to my friend Holga. Because prior to coming up, we received disturbing news. which is just a reminder of the difficulty of the task that we are undertaking. In her comments, Chair Lindsay said, it takes courage to atone for one's mistakes. I've been doing this for 32 years. One would think at some point the hurt would stop, but it never does. Let us recognize that the path is always going to be difficult in doing this work. Our kumu, Edward Kanahele, said, nothing good ever comes from disturbing the dead. Nothing good ever comes from disturbing the dead. But we have to approach our work with courage and with aloha. And with that, I thank you for allowing this opportunity, because initially we were told this might not happen, and for allowing us to share with our people at home, our love and aloha for our kupuna, and continue to ask for our people's prayers, for the strength that we need and the courage we need to complete our work. This is museum number 2. There are 3 more to go before we can go home. So, malama ko aloha. Keep your love. Aloha.
Thank you very much. Now, would you like to undertake this ceremony of pikai to finish the ceremony? Thank you very much.
So these bowls are filled with water, and we've brought with us from Hawaii pa'akai, which is Hawaiian salt, and we mix them together, and we will be sprinkling it on you, and it is meant to be a cleansing ceremony, because all of us have been in the presence of Iwi, and so we do this to cleanse you before you return home to your families.
take them back into the room or? Ich darf Sie einladen, wenn Sie möchten, später noch mit uns zusammenzusitzen und mit der Delegation noch eine Kleinigkeit zu essen. Zunächst werden Sie allerdings die